We're just talking about our favorite journals and conferences right now while we're waiting for everyone else to get here. When
Cut that guy's mic.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Duc Luu. Thank you so much for coming here today to our panel on the do's and don'ts when working with whistleblowers in the digital age. Again, I'm Duc. I'm one of the program directors at Knight Foundation working on our journalism team. I also have the honor and the privilege of being one of the board members for the Signals Network and am really proud of the great work that they've been doing and working with whistleblowers as well. I'm really happy to introduce Rebecca Petras here, Ali Diercks, and Wendell Potter at the end there, who are going to be joining me for this panel today. All right. The thing I want to get started with first is to help clarify some terms for everyone. And I'm going to turn this to Rebecca here. Rebecca, many of the people in this room are journalists. They work with sources. What makes a whistleblower unique and different when you're thinking about them versus sources?
Thank you for that, Duc, and thank you for your support of the Signals Network. Well, it's a very good question, and it has a fuzzy answer. So typically a whistleblower is defined by the law in a more strict way than we define a whistleblower when working with a journalist. A journalist working with a whistleblower is usually working with that person for an extended period of time. The information that they are providing is public interest information, so it has a broad implication. And it is very, very much the case that the reporting for the story is drawn a lot from whatever the whistleblower information is provided. So that's kind of the like fuzzy answer to that. In many ways, we sometimes equate source with whistleblower, but one thing that we would not consider a whistleblower would be someone who is like a subject of a story, who also could have legal jeopardy, but isn't really considered a whistleblower. It is true, however, that a whistleblower can be anonymous or public, and we work with both anonymous and public.
And when we say we, I want to give you a chance to explain what that is. On the next slide here, the Signals Network. Can you just give us a bit of context about what the Signals Network does and how you work with whistleblowers and reporters?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so we work very primarily with journalists. We do work with government bodies as well, but our main objective is to help the journalist with the reporting of their story when it involves a whistleblower. We always start with the whistleblower first. So our concern is that person who has provided information to a journalist to help them write a story that holds power to account, quite honestly. We do that through a sort of end-to-end approach. So we want to be working with that whistleblower as soon as possible. They very often are on a very lonely journey. You will hear about that in a moment. They are often in a situation where they only have the journalist and perhaps one other person in their life who they can talk to, and they don't know what kind of jeopardy or legal or security or traumatic issues they may face. Very, very, very much the case that the whistleblower's journey does not end when that story is published. A lot of times it starts really when the story is published, and goes on for years. So we provide a wide range of services, both for the whistleblower, everything from psychosocial support to security, both virtual and physical, to legal help, and also just public communication support.
And I think hearing what Rebecca says in terms of the services that the Signals Network provides to whistleblowers is one of the reasons why Knight Foundation is really proud to support them. And in terms of this panel, what we'd like to discuss today, really centering around a question of what do we owe each other? What do we owe each other as reporters, as sources, as human beings, and how does that affect the relationships that we have with each other, and how do we do that in a way that treats everyone equitably? And I want to start with talking to some actual whistleblowers down at the far end there. And Ali, I'll start with you because I think for both of you, what I'd love is to help center your stories in terms of, I think I've heard you describe it as that moment, the moment when you decided this was the time for me to tell this story that used to be a secret and to put it out and to start talking to a journalist about it. Can you tell us what led to that moment for you?
Oh gosh. So how my journey started initially was I was working in Washington, D.C. for a white shoe law firm, very prestigious, very elite. I was one of the lower level grunt attorneys, you might say. It was my job to sift through mountains of paper. And as part of that, I was assigned to the firm's internal investigation of CBS and their chief executive, Les Moonves, who had been accused of sexual misconduct, harassment, and other related behavior. And in my position, reviewing thousands and thousands of emails and documents, I became really disturbed by the things I was reading. And over time, it accumulated and accumulated, and I ended up feeding the information that upset me so much to Rachel Abrams at the New York Times, and she and a couple of co-authors published a series of stories about misconduct and a whole bunch of things that were rotten at CBS. And the fallout for me was swift. I got my law license suspended, deservedly so, because attorneys are bound by attorney-client privilege, regardless of whether it would be in the public interest to break that. So I committed a serious ethical violation as an attorney and was deservedly punished for it. The fallout for CBS and for the actresses who were harmed took a little bit longer to play out. But part of what has made my story kind of difficult or complicated to tell is that I didn't have a light bulb moment. It was more like death by 1,000 cuts. So it's hard to say exactly when a switch flipped. It was more like just I felt more and more weighed down by the awfulness of what I was reading and what had been happening to people. And now I'm here. I was silent and anonymous for over 4 years, and in May, the Times offered me the opportunity to become public and tell my story in an episode of The Daily that was released mid-May. So this is the first thing I've done since that came out, and I'm now sort of navigating the waters of what it's like to go from having to keep everything very, very secret to now speaking to people in public. So.
Thank you, Ali. And I highly recommend, if you're interested in more of Ali's story than what we can get into today, is to listen to the daily podcast. I think it was May 18th, just to listen more, and it's just a really moving one. Wendell, can you tell us about the moment when you decided to take your stand? Literally.
Well, yeah. There were different reasons why I left my job at Cigna, which, by the way, was at the time headquartered just a couple blocks from here, a few blocks at 16th and Chestnut. I was the company's chief spokesman. I was vice president of corporate communications. And in a minute, I'll talk about some of the things that led to my decision to leave the company. But I didn't have any intention of being a whistleblower when I left. Several months later, Congress was beginning debate on what became the Affordable Care Act. Before I left Cigna, I was part of an effort to try to develop a strategy in Washington to try to make sure that legislation never passed. And I didn't want to be a part of that. I'd done that kind of work in the past, and I just didn't have it in me to do it again. I was watching, MSNBC was on, and a segment came on. Tamron Hall was hosting it, and she was interviewing a congressman from Tennessee, and I'm from Tennessee. I knew this congressman. And during the interview, she was asking him what he thought about the effort to reform the healthcare system, the health insurance business in particular, what he thought about the problem of the people who were uninsured at that time. There were about 50 million Americans who didn't have health insurance. And he said, well, you know what? A lot of those folks are that way by choice. They've just decided to go naked. And even telling this, I can almost remember how I felt. I was so upset because he was using language that I had written as talking points for our lobbyists to use in Washington to get to members of Congress like this guy. And here he was trying to influence the debate, influence the narrative in Washington about health care reform. And I said, I can't just stay on the sidelines and just let that happen. So it was that one thing that kind of triggered me, that made me determined to figure out some way to make a difference. I've sometimes said that what I do for a living now, or what I do, is in a sense trying to make amends for a lot of what I used to do when I was in my corporate job. And I had been a journalist in my first career. I'd gone into PR work, and I ultimately decided I had spent 20 years working undercover for big insurance companies, and I might have an opportunity to do something that almost no one ever gets a chance to do, and that is to go back into journalism in some way, or at least to try to tell the truth. And that was what pushed me to do it. I began to reach out to people in Washington who I knew were advocates for reform, and that led one introduction to another, ultimately to the staff at the Senate Commerce Committee, and they invited me to testify, and I did do that on June the 24th of 2009, and I knew it was going to be a day that changed my life, but it was a media report of me hearing somebody using my old talking points, and I just felt I had an obligation to try to call that out and to help advocates understand here's what my old industry is going to do to try to kill healthcare reform once again.
So we're obviously at a journalism conference, a bunch of reporters in the room, and so I just want to hear, Ali, why don't you tell us about how you decided to work with Rachel, and tell us about the relationship with her in terms of how did you reach out to her, how did you start telling her that this is something you wanted to do, and just outline a bit more about how that relationship grew.
Sure. Initially, what prompted me to contact the Times in the first place, and I cringe thinking about this in retrospect, but I had read an article that they published about how some of the witnesses in the investigation doubted either the impartiality or the integrity of the investigation, and I felt, well, that's not fair. I'm working on this investigation, and everybody on our team is working really hard to get to the truth. That's not fair. So I sent in a message to their tip jar to say, I know it's not normal for attorneys to reach out, but I think it's important that you know that the people at the firm who are working on this are doing a good job and their hearts are in it, and it's unfair to categorize, what they're doing as lacking integrity. And
Did you do that anonymously?
No.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So that tip was filtered down, was given to Rachel Abrams by the Times, and she reached out to me, and we just began talking about what I was seeing, what I might be willing to do, and we worked very closely together, very intensely, for a fairly short, condensed period of time. And the thing that complicated our relationship the most was that I was caught by the law firm in part because of details that were published in the story. And I say this with two caveats. One, that's my memory of it, and I'm not 100% confident in that, only because you can only attend a trial so many times and see someone swear on their child's life that the guy was wearing a blue shirt, and you see video evidence that it's red. So I know the fallibility of human memory is a thing. And it's also possible the law firm may have told me that so that I would resent Rachel. But the details that were published were something like a page count and a word count of the most important document that I fed to her and give her documents, the information from the document. And it was used as a, like an authentication or a vetting mechanism. The details were included, I think, so it would be clear that this wasn't just some nebulous thing in the ether. There was an actual report that said the investigation was going to go in a drawer, so that, because that's what the board wanted to happen. So that was difficult. The fact that initially I felt burned because of what she wrote, and we didn't speak for quite a long time after that. The other thing that made it really difficult was that she got a book deal and a Pulitzer Prize out of it, and I lost my career, I lost everything. So the divergence in our paths was so dramatic that it made it really hard to feel good about what I did. I think in some ways my narrative as a whistleblower is complicated or unsatisfying because I don't particularly feel brave or proud. I still deal with a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And wrestling with that alone in secret while watching her star ascend, basically, was really, really hard. But to her credit, we had some very difficult, messy, therapeutic conversations about what the relationship between a reporter and a source should be. My husband always reminded me, while all of this was happening, Ali, Rachel's not your friend, you're her source. She's not your friend, she's not your friend. And it was so hard for me to keep that separate, because other than my husband, she was the only person I had to talk about this with. So despite the fact that she said everything that she was obligated to, like, there's no pressure, I can't make this decision for you. You should really think about the consequences before you take actions. And she gave me all the caveats you're supposed to give, and that didn't prevent me from bonding with her in a way that was really complicated and difficult.
Again, only if you're comfortable sharing. You said you didn't speak with her for a while. What initiated you to restart that relationship? Or whoever initiated restarting the relationship?
She would every now and then send me a message on Signal just to say, hey, I wanted to check in, how you're doing, and I ignored all of them. I think it was, when I saw reports about other litigation that resulted from the stories, there was a shareholder lawsuit, other corporate fallout from that resurfaced in the news a little bit, and that made me think, well, maybe it's time, but then I still hesitated. It was honestly just the pressure and the misery of being so alone that I just felt like I can't do this anymore. And the easiest way to find a route into going public and getting this out in the open would be to go back through her. So that's what I did.
Wendell, you had a much different experience. This was something that you were pre-planning. You had the famous Bill Moyer interview. Tell us more about how you decided to work with Bill, and just the steps that it took and kind of all the production that happened to coordinate both that interview that aired along with the testimony in front of Congress.
One of the advocates that I had reached out to happened to know Bill Moyers and asked me if I would be interested in meeting with him and his team, that they had expressed some interest in having a conversation and possibly doing a story. So I did. I went up to New York and met with them, and it was about a 2-hour vetting session to make sure that they saw me as someone who was legitimate and had something important to say, or at least interesting to say. So they agreed they wanted to do a sit-down interview, and they also wanted to send a crew to Washington to film my testimony. So that was different. That was probably very different from the way, I guess, most whistleblowers reach the media. I did know, obviously, when I testified that it was going to change my life. Following that, I did have a sit-down interview, extensive one with Bill Moyers, and it aired a few days after my testimony. The thing I think that intrigued Bill was some of the stories that I told about the reasons I actually did leave Cigna. When I referenced the fact that 50 million people didn't have health insurance in this country, was one of the reasons why I ultimately decided to leave my job. I had gone back to visit family in Tennessee and heard about an outdoor clinic that was being held at a county fairgrounds not too far from where I grew up. And I went there out of curiosity. There was a story about it in my hometown newspaper. And I went there not having any idea what to expect. I had been able to lead a life that was so far removed from the way so many people experience health insurance and health care in this country. I saw people who were standing in long lines at this clinic waiting to get care by doctors and nurses who were volunteering their time. And those lines led to barns and animal stalls. People were being treated in animal stalls. This was in 2007, actually, when this happened. And it just did something to me. I realized that had I not been fortunate, I could have been one of those people. And I also realized that the work that I was doing as a PR guy for the insurance industry was obscuring the truth about how many Americans were not getting the care that they need, and in many cases couldn't get insurance at any price, because at that point insurance companies could still blackball you because of a pre-existing condition. They could refuse to sell you coverage because you've been sick in the past, or if they were willing to sell it to you, it would be at a price that was just far beyond what most people could afford. I made a commitment that day to try to figure out some other way to earn a living. And as a former journalist, I was just so sad at what had happened to me. As someone who, as a journalist, tried to be straightforward and never mislead or obscure facts. That's what I was doing for a living, and was being paid a lot more than when I was a journalist. It took, though, another case that actually made me walk out the door. One of the responsibilities my team and I had, we had to deal with what we referred to as high-profile stories. When somebody was denied treatment by the company that doctors said a patient needed, every now and then the patient would reach out to the media, and we would get a call from a reporter. Why did you, in this case, why did Cigna deny coverage for a liver transplant for a 17-year-old girl in Los Angeles? At first, I was just kind of dismissive. I thought, well, we could just make this story go right away like all the others by just sending out a statement to the reporter and working kind of on background to make the story go away. This was not going to go away. And it ultimately became a very big media problem, a PR problem for Cigna. Stories began to appear in LA and then all over the country. Natalie had been diagnosed with leukemia some years earlier. Initially, the treatments were working, but ultimately they didn't. She needed a liver transplant, which was covered under her family's policy. But a medical director in Pittsburgh, 2,500 miles away from Natalie and the UCLA Medical Center, decided that in his opinion it wasn't medically appropriate or medically necessary for Natalie. The family was just not going to take that denial and appealed it. The appeal didn't work, so they decided to make a big stink about it. And they were successful in getting a lot of media attention focused on Nataline's case. So much so that my company, a few days later, decided, well, maybe we can just reverse that denial and the story will go away. And I kept the CEO briefed about what was going on. The family actually had arranged to have a protest in front of Cigna's offices in Glendale, California. And I let the leadership of the company know what was going on. The CEO called a meeting and decided during that time that the company would reverse that denial. And one of my jobs was to try to figure out how to get the word to Nataline's family that Cigna was going to pay for the transplant. And I was watching on TV, it was CNN was doing this live, and I could tell when someone actually did tell Mrs. Sarkeesian that Cigna had changed its mind, would pay for the transplant. It was, I felt mission accomplished. I've done something here that might save this young woman's life. The problem is she got sicker during the time that the transplant request had been sent to Cigna in the first place. She got sicker and she became ineligible for a transplant. She died 5 hours after Cigna said it would cover the transplant. And I could not do that again. So a few weeks later, I turned in my notice and left the company. She was a victim of something that's in the news now. The Affordable Care Act didn't fix this. It's called prior authorization, and it's something that health insurers use to this day to keep people from getting the care that they need, and it's more often than not, it is used to save money, to avoid paying for needed care. The OIG just a few weeks ago did a report about how major for-profit health insurance companies in particular are using prior authorization in both the Medicare Advantage program and the Medicaid program to refuse to pay for needed care. So there's a lot of work yet to do, but people die every single day. You don't see as many stories as you should about the Nataline Sarkeesians that are out there. But that was the ultimate reason why I left my job and why I felt an obligation to change sides, if you will, and try to help people understand this corrupt system that we still have in this country.
So in the latter half of the session, I want to talk about what's needed in terms of helping whistleblowers individually like you all, both in terms of the relationships that you have with reporters and news organizations. And Rebecca, for you, I want to, so I'll ask them about that, but for Rebecca, for you, I want you to take a step back first and think about it from an ecosystem, a media ecosystem, in terms of you've worked with a lot of whistleblowers now at the Signals Network. You have a good sense of kind of the range of services that they need. Can you tell us, what does the industry, in terms of helping whistleblowers and getting more of them telling their stories writ large and supporting them after the fact, what does the industry need to do in order to help in order to help whistleblowers? So why don't we start there, and then I'll
Great, thank you. I mean, there are a number of things that can be done. One is what we're doing today, which is just to let people know that this is what the person who you're dealing with as a whistleblower, as a source, goes through. And you know, it's not that you need to be their friend, but you can put them in, you can help them find the help that they need. We hope, as a small nonprofit, supported by Knight, to be able to come to the journalists, or for the journalists to come to us quickly, and to be able to say, you know, I've got this person, you know, she's got security issues, or, you know, maybe she's got some PTSD or whatever it is, can you help her out? And I think that is extremely helpful to the whistleblower, but also to the journalist. Journalist has a job to do. And I think the whistleblowers know that. They fully understand that. but they don't know where else to turn to. So by involving someone who can give them some support, it allows for the journalists to focus on telling that story. So that's one of the things that we hope to do in the ecosystem, is to make it more clear and to help more journalists get the help they need for their sources earlier. I would say that.
Ali, personally, as you're thinking, you're grappling with the issues right now. What would you say advice you would give to reporters who are going to work with the next generation of Alis? What would you tell them in terms of being able to work with whistleblowers like yourself? How can they help you?
I think I would say that it's important to get an outside support like the Signals Network early on in the process. I did not understand before all this happened that whistleblowing is a fundamentally traumatic experience. It's painful. And if I had had a support network that could link me up with, therapy, for goodness sakes. If I had had a therapist to talk to while all this stuff was happening, it may not have put so much of the onus on Rachel to support me emotionally. And to some extent, in my situation, there's only so much that could be done because I straight up violated a professional obligation. So I had a unique need. I needed to find a pro bono attorney who could help me with the disciplinary process. I found that on my own. It was hard. The Times gave me a couple of suggestions to start with, and I kept getting passed along until finally someone helped me. And if I hadn't had to deal with all of that on my own, and again, in secret, if I'd had an external support early on, it would have made a huge difference.
And Wendell, obviously what you did is far in the past now. You're still living it every day. What advice do you have now with the perspective of time that you can give when you're talking to other journalists and whistleblowers like Ali too?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for doing this, for this panel, and for what you all do at the Signal Network and Night Support for this. It's so important. Whistleblowers really can help journalism and help you tell stories you otherwise would not be able to tell. I think as a journalist, and again, I was one, I know you talk to sources all the time, and it becomes a story. It can be a big story, but then you go on to your next story, and you typically don't understand or appreciate what the person is going through. And it's facing the unknown, and usually you have worst case scenarios in your mind to start with. If you are testifying against someone and in court, sometimes there's legal protection that you get, some support to even establish a new identity or move away. Nothing like that exists in this world, but it can be just as scary. The people you work for are no longer your friends. You've severed ties with people you worked with. And even people you know who you think are your friends may not necessarily be there for you. I can remember so vividly getting an email from a college roommate of mine after my story was out there saying, well, Wendell, aren't you biting the hand that fed you? So you get that kind of stuff, and it can just stab you. It's really hard. But I think the journalism profession needs to understand that there is a role that the profession needs to play in providing some support that didn't exist that I knew of when I did what I did. It's so important because people are putting their lives, their careers at jeopardy, and often it doesn't have a happy ending. You can get sued, you can have legal issues, you can have a hard time finding another job. I knew that I was never going to be able to work in a corporate job again, and that didn't bother me. I was sort of late in my career when I left. I was 56, I think, when I left Cigna. But still, I had to figure out, how do you piece a life together? How do you go forward? How do you find a way to earn a living? And you feel cut adrift, untethered. So it's something again, thank you so much for doing this. And I want, as you talk to whistleblowers, to have a bit of understanding of what they're going through, and try to maybe even be equipped to offer some resources, some advice to them. And also know that as they anticipate your story coming out, that too is a terrifying time. You don't know how you're going to be quoted. I did this kind of work for decades, working for the industry. I talk to reporters all the time, so that gave me some level of comfort that most whistleblowers don't have. Talking to a reporter can be damn scary at any time, but I'd done it as part of my profession. But I can remember every time I talked to a reporter, just a routine story, I was always nervous about how I was going to be quoted in the story or portrayed, because I knew that my CEO would be paying attention. So that's always something that's going on. But if you're doing something as a whistleblower and you haven't had experience in working with the news media, it can absolutely be paralyzing. And so just know that all that is going on for a person who's trying to do the right thing and doing and willing to do that at enormous cost.
I want to start taking some audience questions, so please feel free to start lining up at the mic if you have them. And in the meantime, Rebecca, I want to talk to you about the urgency of addressing and starting to provide these services to whistleblowers right now, both in the sense of like the number of whistleblowers seems to be increasing and accelerating, but also the complexity of the kinds of needs that whistleblowers need to have, partly because they need it, but also partly because we're recognizing that these are new things that they deserve to have, like therapy and things like that I don't think we were thinking about 10 plus years ago. And so help us explain the urgency of the problem in terms of how it's accelerating and increasing apace.
Sure. We have the number of folks who are coming to us has increased dramatically. I would say it has, there was a time in late 2021 when it became clear. I would really mark it in big tech, with big tech needing more accountability around the Frances Hogan disclosure with the Wall Street Journal in October 2021, September, October 2021, where there was an understanding that if we are going to hold these big powers to account, we are relying on very brave individuals to do so. To come forward, and so that after that we had quite an increase, especially in the big tech industry. We work in any industry and also in government, but we do have a bit of a focus on big tech. So yeah, there is an increase. One of the other things, as you mentioned, is there's more of an understanding now that before the story comes out, the person needs to think about a few things. If you, for example, leave your job and then get another job before the story comes out, you're going to be better off than trying to get a job later. So that's like that's just an example of one of the things to think about. Of course, there's legal issues to think about. There's your own communication, how you are going to be able to either address anonymously, stay anonymous, or go public. So there's all kinds of considerations that the sooner that someone can talk to someone who's not the journalist, but is supportive of the work the journalist is doing, the better.
Okay. There. Tell us who you are and where you're from.
My name is Juliana. I'm a student at the University of Georgia. I'm really interested in the Signals network and the work that you do, and I'm curious about, in the international context, how you mitigate different laws, legal issues. What kind of support do you provide for whistleblowers in those contexts? Thank you.
Sure. The Signals Network is international. We are mostly focused on Europe and in the US, but we also do some work in South Asia, Middle East, and Africa. The laws are different. The protections are different everywhere you go. We spend a lot of time working with the laws that are in Europe. We are currently putting together a handbook about the law in the UK and in Ireland. So while the issues around whistleblowing and the whistleblower themselves can be pretty universal, the laws make it different for each, wherever they are. One example would be, if it's a government issue or like a whistleblowing about a government, it could be in an area that is extremely dangerous, where security becomes the biggest issue. Or maybe they need a safe housing. So the issues change, but the experience themselves, the journey themselves, it can be fairly universal.
Thank you.
Hey, Kristen Mossbrucker-Garza. I'm a business reporter here in Philadelphia for WHYY News. So just kind of in general during my career, not necessarily here in Philadelphia, whenever I've not necessarily worked with whistleblowers, but people who are sources who maybe work for a specific company or have company information, we've always been counseled by media attorneys that we have to be really careful because we cannot solicit company information because then we could get in trouble as a news organization. So do you have any advice? There was even a situation one time when somebody gave us the passwords to a company dashboard and we were told explicitly not to access that. And you have any general advice when you're interested in the information, but how do you access it, making sure that you're not breaking the law?
We're not lawyers. Let's
I was
start
just
with
going to
that.
say, I am not
I
a
think
lawyer.
I do know some lawyers. I see some lawyers in the back over there.
We have a legal director, and I would definitely push that question to her, since I would get I'm not a lawyer.
Okay.
But please, happy to exchange cards.
Okay.
Oh, and I would just add that in
Oh,
my
there is a
case
lawyer.
in in my case in particular, it was always led by what I volunteered. Rachel never requested anything. She was always led by the pieces of information I found most interesting, which I think is certainly seems like the safest way to go, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Definitely. Please feel free to reach out
Yeah,
to
definitely. I have someone that you can talk to.
Okay, thank you.
Randy.
Yeah, Randy Pick from the Reynolds Journalism Institute at the University of Missouri. So this is for Wendell and Ali. Often when reporters start interviews or relationships, they kind of talk about the ground rules or kind of setting up, here's how this is going to work, and they explain it. And I think the idea of having an outside organization early on is awesome. But in your case, do you feel like there was, the ground rules were made, given to you, and they were easy to understand, and they kind of carried you through the process? Or is that something that maybe more reporters and newsrooms need to think about before they even get to the step of bringing in the Signals Network or something like that?
I think there really is an obligation. Again, because of having worked in the media as long as I did, I just had an understanding of the ground rules and made sure as I was talking to reporters that this is on the record, this is for background, this is off the record, whatever, just to make sure that you're on the same page. I don't think a lot of people really understand the distinction. I think it's very important for journalists to be upfront and explain what the rules are and how your story or whatever you tell them may show up in the media story. I think it's important too, just maybe make a reference to the previous question. make sure that you're not encouraging the person to do anything that really puts them in legal jeopardy. I've not been sued, knock on wood, but I don't disclose anything that I sign an agreement not to disclose, because certainly in corporate America now, almost everybody has to sign something. So you have to be very, very careful, or you can get sued pretty easily. I haven't needed to disclose proprietary information about Cigna or Humana where I worked before, because what I talk about largely are just common industry-wide practices, but that's not always the case when you're talking to a reporter. So you've got to be very careful and not let them put themselves at an unnecessary risk. Sometimes the whistleblower decides, even with having signed something and disclosing something that's presumably confidential or protected information, is still worth it. But you need to have those kinds of conversations with the source as well too, and make sure that you're not misleading, or just make sure that the person really understands what's going on and what they could be facing if if they do disclose something that really is truly considered company secret.
Alan?
For me, I felt like the ground rules were always clear. The issue is that the messy reality of what we were experiencing together didn't always allow for the clean delineations that we might want out of ground rules, if that makes sense. I was always, advised that I shouldn't feel any pressure to do anything that would put me in legal jeopardy. Obviously, the decisions I made came at a significant cost, but I knew that. And I never felt pressured to do anything against my own interest. And I had to be clear that I understood that that's what I was doing. So I think it's worth, the ground rules are extremely important, but it's also worth considering the fact that as the reporting journey continues, life might be messier than the rules allow for, if that makes sense.
Might need an update to the ground rules.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Sure.
okay.
There are Rebecca, you want to know what?
Just around the NDAs and all those things that you need to sign these days, there is a movement to reduce NDAs that's pretty current. Of course, in California, the Silence No More Act became a law because of a whistleblower, and she pushed it through, and it does not allow for NDAs keeping people from talking about sexual harassment in the state of California. There's also some shareholder movement to reduce NDA, the number of NDAs that are signed. So hopefully there's a bit of a shift there.
That's one reason that I felt compelled to do what I did, is because so many of the victims who were directly harmed would be in legal jeopardy. They would be violating an agreement that I was not bound to. My professional ethics were a completely different issue. So the risks and the losses that I faced and confronted were completely different than someone who has different legal obligations that could be very serious. So I saw an opportunity to take a risk that other people might not be in the position to. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm a little short, so I'm going to get on my tippy toes. Hi, I'm Libby Hobbs. I'm also a student journalist at the University of Georgia. And something I was curious about was care for whistleblowers after the fact that we've talked a lot about. And Ali, you were mentioning how Rachel would still reach out to you. Understandably so, you weren't ready to pursue that relationship. But as a learning journalist, I was curious, how long should we keep reaching out? And at one point, do you see that relationship, or how long do you see that relationship lasting? Is it something that you think will be a lifetime, or is there a certain point where you're like, I am no longer ready to stay in contact with you? And then also from the Signals Network perspective, at what point are the people harmed, I guess, ready to go back into their day-to-day life? And is that care that you guys give a lifelong thing?
Alan?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I'd ever thought about it that way. I think in some ways I'm going to be tied to Rachel for the rest of my life because working with her fundamentally changed everything about the course of my professional existence. I don't regret working with her. I'm glad I met her. I'm glad she's in my life. And knowing her has been an enriching experience, even if it was also painful. I think until the whistleblower indicates that they want a hard stop, that they want closure, I think it's fair to consider the door open. And that's really what I did with Rachel. I didn't say, never speak to me again. It was just, I can't talk to you right now, maybe someday in the future. So at intervals of maybe like 6 months, I think she would, send me a how are you or something. And I was always free to ignore those, but when I was finally ready, I took her up on it, so.
Yeah, it's a really good question about when the journey ends. It varies for every whistleblower. I think there is a big difference between public and anonymous. So if the whistleblower is anonymous, a lot of the journey has to do with like PTSD, like trauma, and really dealing with that. Maybe they are worried about some kind of security issue or legal issue, but it's a lot less than if they're public. But the trauma, the need for therapy and stuff, that's pretty much universal. With the public whistleblower, it's long, and it's a long process. There's a lot around, what do I do now? Like literally, what do I do to make money? But also, do I stay public? Do I continue to fight for this issue? Like someone like Ali, she's known as the #MeToo whistleblower. Like, does she even want to really continue to fight for Me Too issues? It's not a given that she does, we always put them into a box or want them in a box. And that's not a given at all. So really dealing with that, trying to understand what kind of job, a lot of what we do is we help whistleblowers think through what their next job will be, whether it'll be like in industry. We recently working with someone in France who just went back into the industry. He was anonymous though. Working with them to get fellowships, working to see if they, want to go into some sort of public, like a book deal or something like that. So it's years. It takes time, but we stay with them.
Thank you, Rebecca. Simon?
Hi all, thanks so much. Wendell, Ali, I really specifically want to say thank you for coming, and I appreciate that you're here and continuing to tell your story. I hope that this is a healthy experience for you. I really do. I'm sorry journalism happened to you. Truly. So I'm a reporter. One of the things I do is I do some journalism work on the Knight Foundation. We've done reporting about alleged financial impropriety, racist, sexist workplace practices, and it's been challenging to develop relationships with those folks because it's an institution that has a high level of turnover, a secret sort of autocratic leadership. So what is the responsibility? We've talked a lot about your responsibility and journalists' responsibility, but what is the responsibility of public interest institutions to maintain whistleblower policies and practices that allow people like you to come forward without them losing your jobs?
It's almost like creating something that doesn't exist. And, and maybe from these kinds of sessions that really can be built. Whistleblowers, as I said earlier, and as we've talked, can really make a huge difference in public policy and how corporate America behaves. Typically, and I think Ali would say the same thing, CBS is still around, Cigna is still around. They're going to continue, and they know they have tons and tons of lawyers and lots of money, so they are going to be able to figure out how to go forward. Not so much for the people who are calling them out on wrongdoing, and I think there really needs to be some real serious thought to how can there be something that is available and known to potential whistleblowers, that there is, you know you're thinking about doing something that is very, very risky and can change, and it will change your life. But if you have knowledge and that there really are some good resources and lots of resources at an institutional level somehow, it can make a big difference, and I think can really lead to meaningful change in corporate behavior and in public policy also.
And Rebecca, I think Signals Network does a lot of advocacy work on behalf of whistleblowers too, right?
Yeah, there's different kinds of advocacy. There's the advocacy around better protection for whistleblowers, and that's something that we really want to focus on, especially in the U.S. and in Europe. But then there's the advocacy around whatever the particular issue is, and in many cases, we work with whistleblowers to take whatever the initial story was and to take it to the next level, whether it's through congressional hearings. We have a whistleblower who has been working with parliaments throughout Europe around helping deal with platform issues around platform workers. He's known as the Uber whistleblower, Mark McGann, and he has gone really far into influencing public policy. So there's a real role there for the whistleblower in the U.S., where big tech is not regulated in any real fashion. Whistleblowers have spent a lot of time working within the halls of Congress and in state houses to talk about the harms of social media, the issues around disinformation, and those are individual people who worked at those companies, who came forward, risked everything, lost their jobs, and are willing to help influence policy.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Can we have a round of applause for our guests today? Thank you so much, guys. Definitely take a look at the Signals Network. Their QR code is there if you ever want to hear more about some of the work they're doing. Ali, please listen to her podcast and feel free to chat with them afterwards. There's some nice people.
If I could give the journalists here a parting thought. Obviously, you don't want things to go wrong, but if they do, you can survive it. Your source can survive it. The worst thing that could have happened to me, and I'm still standing. My life isn't over. So it can be really scary to take a risk if you don't know what could happen if the worst befalls you. And I hope that journalists and sources can keep in mind that even if things do go wrong, even if you make a mistake, it's possible to survive.
Thank you, guys.